If you sign this, everything will collapse, Aaliyah Johnson said, her voice steady as the room went completely silent. CO David Hamilton's sharp blue eyes narrowed at her, the polished conference table reflecting his tense posture. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 31st floor, casting a harsh glow on the neatly stacked contracts and the scattered papers she had uncovered, but she'd barely noticed the glare. Her attention was entirely on the clause that could bankrupt the company. The assistants and junior executives around the room froze, glancing at one another, unsure whether to breathe or speak, their hands hovering over keyboards, pens, and tablets. Aaliyah's palms were calm, her shoulders squared, as if she carried an invisible weight of certainty that the room had not yet earned. Sir, this merger clause transfers all liability to Hamilton Global if anything goes wrong. Lawsuits, defaults, financial penalties. Your company takes the full hit, she continued, gesturing to the highlighted sections with a smooth precision born of meticulous study late into the night. David's jaw tightened, the corner of his lips twitching with the faintest hint of disbelief, as he leaned back in his leather chair, fingers tapping rapidly against the table's glass surface. He opened his mouth to speak, then paused, the words stuck somewhere between authority and surprise, before slamming the table with a gentle but unmistakable authority. Who gave you the right to speak? He finally demanded, voice firm but slightly wavering, drawing every gaze toward the young assistant who dared to challenge him. Aaliyah's gaze didn't waver. Instead, she met his eyes with calm clarity, the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant traffic below filling the tense silence. I am not overstepping, sir, she replied, her tone respectful yet resolute. I simply want to prevent a disaster that could cost the company millions. The room seemed to shrink around them, the sunlight glinting off the metallic pens, glass water bottles, and polished hardwood floor, every reflective surface capturing a moment suspended between confrontation and revelation. David's hand hovered over the contract, a hesitation that was foreign to his usual decisiveness, while Aaliyah's quiet determination seemed to radiate, an unspoken gravity that pulled the attention of everyone present. The interns exchanged nervous glances, the seasoned executives shifted subtly in their seats, and even the receptionist at the glass wall paused mid-note-taking, sensing that something pivotal was unfolding. Aaliyah straightened, allowing the soft creak of her leather shoes on the floor to punctuate the heavy silence, before continuing. I have cross-checked this with every clause in the subsidiary contracts and the legal appendix. Signing this in its current form would guarantee a complete financial loss for Hamilton Global. David's eyes flickered toward the glowing city skyline beyond the windows, then back at her, caught between outrage at being challenged and the dawning realization that she might be right. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation as he slowly leaned forward, fingers brushing the highlighted text, a breath held in a frozen room where authority had met insight, and the tension suggested that one decision in the next few heartbeats could alter the trajectory of the entire company. David Hamilton leaned back slightly, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the contract. The polished wood cool beneath his fingers as he exhaled slowly, a tension he had never felt in boardrooms of similar scale. The sunlight shifted across the room, brushing over the rows of attentive faces, the glint of pens and tablets capturing the fleeting light, each reflection a silent witness to the weight of the moment. Aaliyah Johnson remained composed, her posture straight, eyes calm and unwavering, yet in them was a quiet determination that seemed to echo through the high-ceilinged space. The assistants shuffled papers nervously, exchanging glances that conveyed both apprehension and a shared curiosity about how the situation would unfold. Every step she had taken in her preparation led to this instant, every late night reviewing legal clauses, every annotation in the margins, every meticulous comparison of subsidiary agreements now poised to show its value. She drew in a measured breath and pointed out another detail, subtle yet critical, the phrasing that if overlooked would cascade into financial exposure. David's eyes flicked down at the highlighted lines, fingers brushing lightly across the paper, a hesitation that felt uncharacteristic, a pause that seemed to slow the room around him. The city outside the expansive glass walls hummed with life, distant car horns and the rhythmic pulse of the morning traffic providing a backdrop to a conference room suspended in a tense stillness, where authority had met insight in a rare collision. Aaliyah's voice, steady and confident, continued to outline potential ramifications, each sentence measured, precise, carrying the gravity of careful analysis rather than confrontation. The executives around the table leaned forward subtly, some with raised eyebrows, others exchanging subtle nods, the tension mingling with recognition that the young assistant's assessment was not only accurate but indispensable. The room seemed to breathe with anticipation, each slight movement of a pen, the shuffle of paper, the faint hum of the air conditioning accentuating the suspended moment. David's expression shifted imperceptibly, a flicker of realization passing across his features, a momentary crack in the armor of confidence that he maintained so rigidly in the presence of his team. He leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the table, eyes fixed on the clauses, tracing the logical path that Aaliyah had laid out, seeing for the first time the potential fallout, and how narrowly the company could avoid a critical mistake. The faint click of a pen being set aside echoed in the room, as if marking a subtle transition from doubt to comprehension, a recognition that the quiet diligence of one individual had illuminated a blind spot no one else had noticed. Aaliyah adjusted her stance slightly, allowing the rhythm of her breathing to remain steady, her focus unwavering on the factual presentation, while the weight of her insight settled like a palpable force in the still air. David's gaze lingered, shifting from the document to the assistant, a silent acknowledgment. Passing in the space between them, the understanding that the value of diligence and integrity could not be measured merely by position or status, but by the clarity of mind and courage to speak even when the room expected silence. The sunlight waned slightly as clouds drifted past, casting brief shadows across the floor, mirroring the shifting perception in the room, as the executives watched closely, sensing the gravity of a decision and the emergence of respect from a source that had initially been dismissed. Every moment seemed stretched, each breath measured, until David finally straightened, the tension easing slightly from his shoulders, eyes still fixed on Aaliyah, and in that pause hung the possibility of recognition, a reconsideration of past judgments, and the quiet power of insight over authority. David Hamilton slowly exhaled, the weight of the documents pressing down on him in a way that no authority could deflect, as his eyes traced the meticulously highlighted clauses once more. Aaliyah Johnson stood a few feet away, posture unwavering, hands lightly resting on the edge of her notebook, her mind racing through every contingency she had prepared for this very moment. The room, flooded with the soft, golden light of late morning, felt suspended in time, each reflective surface capturing both the tension and the silent acknowledgment that something remarkable was occurring. The junior executives shifted subtly, pens hovering over notepads, unsure whether to break the silence or remain observers of a quiet confrontation unfolding. Aaliyah's calm voice cut through the ambient hum, precise and deliberate, as she outlined the series of cascading effects that could result from the clause being signed, illustrating how a minor oversight could escalate into a full-scale financial exposure. David's brow furrowed, fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table, hesitation now mingled with dawning respect as he considered the clarity and depth of her analysis. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city pulsed with activity, the distant hum of traffic and faint clatter of construction juxtaposed against the intense stillness inside, emphasizing the gravity of a single individual standing firm against the potential collapse of a corporate decision. Each word Aaliyah spoke carried the authority of preparation and intellect, her tone unshakable despite the high stakes and the historical expectation of silence in the face of rank. David's gaze flickered repeatedly between the contract and her, internal conflict playing across his face as the weight of accountability became tangible in the warm light. Aaliyah adjusted her stance slightly, letting the quiet strength of her reasoning radiate through her calm demeanor, her every gesture measured yet purposeful, embodying confidence grounded in meticulous preparation. The executive's eyes followed her every movement, noting the precision in her annotations, the way she referenced subsidiary agreements, and the subtle assurance that her conclusions were sound. David's mind raced, tracing the logic laid out, visualizing the potential fallout, and feeling a rare vulnerability as he recognized that the solution to a looming crisis had come from the person he had initially underestimated. The room seemed to breathe with the rhythm of awareness and contemplation, a delicate interplay between authority and insight, and in that suspended moment, the concept of respect for competence, integrity, and courage began to resonate, leaving the executives and David alike with a newfound perspective on the quiet power of measured and informed action. As Aaliyah concluded her detailed assessment, the soft scrape of her chair on the polished floor punctuated the end of her explanation, leaving a brief, reflective silence that seemed to stretch, giving space for recognition, realization, and the subtle acknowledgment that one voice, when informed and steadfast, could shape the course of decisions and the future of an entire organization. The sunlight shifted across the room, casting elongated patterns across the polished floor and glinting off the glass water bottles lined neatly on the side table as David Hamilton remained seated, fingers brushing lightly against the contract, his mind racing through scenarios he had not previously considered. Aaliyah Johnson, standing near the edge of the room, maintained her composed stance, a subtle rhythm in her breathing reflecting the quiet confidence she had cultivated through countless hours of preparation and review. The executives and assistants observed silently, the faint hum of the air conditioning blending with the distant sounds of city traffic, creating a backdrop to the tension-filled moment where authority met insight. Aaliyah carefully outlined the next series of implications, tracing the path of potential liability and illustrating how a single overlooked line could cascade into far-reaching financial consequences. Each sentence she spoke was precise, measured, and deliberate, imbued with a clarity that drew the attention of everyone present, compelling them to reconsider assumptions and recalibrate their understanding of the stakes. David's gaze flicked repeatedly between her and the document, a quiet shift in his posture signaling an internal reckoning, as he traced her reasoning with a meticulousness that mirrored her own attention to detail. The light from the windows accentuated the contours of his furrowed brow and the subtle tension in his jaw, highlighting the silent realization that the expertise and foresight Aaliyah brought were indispensable. Around them, the room seemed to vibrate with an almost imperceptible energy, each click of a pen, shuffle of paper, and soft exhale of the staff emphasizing the weight of the unfolding decision. Aaliyah's calm presence acted as a counterbalance to the intensity, her steady voice resonating with authority born not from position but from knowledge and preparation. The contrast between the polished confidence of the CEO and the composed determination of the assistant created a palpable tension, a dynamic that drew the eyes of every observer and held the moment suspended in a delicate equilibrium. The sunlight now cast warm highlights across the table, reflecting off the metallic edges of documents and pens, illuminating the intricate dance of thought and consideration as David moved his hands slowly along the margin of the highlighted sections. Aaliyah's subtle nods and carefully paced explanations guided the room through a web of implications, each detail adding depth and clarity to the scenario that had initially seemed straightforward. The executives shifted in their seats, some leaning forward with curiosity, others exchanging quiet glances of acknowledgment, all recognizing the significance of the insight being shared and the integrity of the assistant who delivered it. David exhaled slowly, a subtle softening of his features suggesting an emerging respect and awareness, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly as he allowed the weight of her analysis to settle fully in his mind. The interplay of light, quiet reflection, and meticulous reasoning in the room created a cinematic pause, a suspended moment that underscored the power of preparation, insight, and courage in a space traditionally dominated by hierarchy and unquestioned authority. In that pause, the room collectively sensed the turning of a tide, the emergence of recognition for a voice that had been underestimated, and the silent acknowledgement that one well-prepared individual could shift the course of decisions and influence the future of the entire organization. David Hamilton's fingers lingered over the edge of the contract, the warmth of the morning sun now softened as clouds drifted across the skyline, creating shifting shadows that played over the polished conference room floor. Aaliyah Johnson remained standing near the doorway, her stance unwavering, eyes tracking the subtle changes in his expression, the quiet confidence in her presence filling the space with a calm authority that contrasted sharply with the tension that had dominated the room moments before. The assistants and executives exchanged subtle glances, sensing the shift in the dynamic, their pens pausing mid-note, and screens dimming slightly as if the energy in the room had altered. Aaliyah stepped forward, gesturing gently toward the highlighted clauses, her movements deliberate yet fluid, each motion underscoring the importance of the details she had meticulously reviewed. I have cross-referenced these provisions with all subsidiary agreements and the risk analysis documents, she said, her voice steady and controlled, carrying clarity and precision that seemed to anchor the room in focus. David leaned back slightly, brow furrowed, eyes narrowing as he traced the lines with an intensity that suggested a mental calculation, each thought measured against the possibility of potential losses and liabilities. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as he processed the implications, the distant hum of traffic and soft air conditioning providing a subtle rhythm that accentuated the gravity of the unfolding moment. Aaliyah continued to outline the specific chain reactions that could result if the clause were signed without amendment, her voice unwavering, her cadence deliberate, drawing attention to the most critical points with subtle gestures of her hands, each movement highlighting the meticulous care and preparation behind her analysis. David's gaze shifted between the document and her, a faint softening in his posture, shoulders relaxing slightly as he began to recognize the depth of her insight, the accuracy of her assessment, and the courage it took to present it despite the initial resistance. The executives leaned forward, intrigued, absorbing the logical progression of her argument, while the assistants adjusted their posture, pens poised but unmoving, the silence of acknowledgment hanging heavy in the air. Aaliyah's calm composure and methodical explanation illuminated the room, creating a sense of order and clarity where there had been tension and uncertainty, the sunlight casting warm highlights on the polished surfaces, reflecting the subtle energy of focus and realization. David exhaled slowly, allowing the recognition of her contribution to settle, the room's atmosphere shifting from one of confrontation to quiet respect, the balance between authority and informed insight subtly realigned as the implications of her observations became unmistakably clear to everyone present. In that suspended moment, the understanding crystallized that the diligence, preparation, and integrity of one individual could redirect the course of decisions, safeguard the company, and quietly command respect without a word raised in anger, as Aaliyah's steady presence transformed the dynamic, leaving a lingering impression of competence and quiet strength that resonated through the room. The subtle tension in the room shifted as David Hamilton leaned forward slightly, his fingers tracing the highlighted lines with deliberate care, the polished surface of the conference table reflecting the muted sunlight that now angled through the skyscraper windows. Aaliyah Johnson remained poised, the quiet strength in her posture commanding attention without a word, her eyes locked on the contract as if it were an extension of her own careful calculations. Around them, the staff sat motionless, sensing the significance of the moment, the soft tapping of pens and faint hum of electronics forming a delicate backdrop to the unfolding realization. Aaliyah spoke again, her voice clear and unwavering, explaining the cascading financial risks in a logical sequence, each word carrying the weight of meticulous research and careful foresight. David's expression softened slightly, the tension in his jaw easing as he followed the thread of her reasoning, his mind absorbing the implications she had so calmly presented. The room seemed to breathe in tandem with her measured cadence, the sunlight casting warm reflections on the metallic edges of pens, the polished wood of the table, and the glass water bottles, illuminating the scene in a cinematic interplay of light and shadow. Each executive in the room subtly shifted, their attention riveted on the clarity of her analysis, the precision of her observations, and the quiet authority she exuded despite the initial circumstances. Aaliyah's hands moved gently, indicating sections of the contract, her gestures fluid and purposeful, reinforcing her verbal points with visual emphasis, while her calm demeanor contrasted with the intensity of the stakes, creating a rhythm that pulled the room into alignment with her perspective. David exhaled, the faint creak of his chair punctuating the stillness as he leaned back momentarily, considering the weight of the insights she had provided and the potential outcomes of the decision that hung in the balance. The air felt charged with awareness, the distant city sounds filtering through the glass walls. Yet the focus remained unwavering within the space, a tension suspended between authority and insight. Aaliyah's subtle nods, precise explanations, and unwavering gaze created a quiet gravity, compelling attention, demanding recognition without arrogance or demand. David's eyes flickered with comprehension, a newfound respect mingling with the initial surprise and hesitation, acknowledging the depth of her preparation and the value of her foresight. The room's atmosphere settled into a reflective calm, each person present internalizing the gravity of what had been revealed, sensing the balance between insight, diligence, and the authority that now had to reconcile with it. The interplay of light, measured words, and deliberate gestures created a cinematic tableau, emphasizing the quiet yet powerful influence of one individual's careful preparation, courage, and integrity in shaping not only immediate decisions but the trajectory of an entire organization. In that stillness, the weight of responsibility, clarity, and recognition hovered, leaving an unmistakable impression of the strength found in intellect, preparation, and steadfast composure. The room remained still as David Hamilton's gaze lifted from the contract to meet Aaliyah Johnson's steady eyes, a subtle shift in his posture signaling the first trace of reconsideration. The sunlight had softened further, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floor and reflecting off the meticulously organized files and glass water bottles on the sideboard, highlighting the quiet gravity of the moment. Aaliyah's calm presence seemed to anchor the entire space, her measured breathing and poised stance conveying the strength of one who knew the depth of her responsibility and the clarity of her reasoning. Around them, the executives and assistants remained silent, the faint hum of the air conditioning and distant city traffic providing a muted backdrop to a scene that felt suspended, where authority and insight balanced delicately on the edge of recognition. Aaliyah extended her hand slightly toward the highlighted sections of the contract, indicating the sequence of potential consequences with a fluid motion that complemented her verbal explanation, each word deliberate and precise, underscoring the importance of every detail she had painstakingly verified. David's fingers traced the margins of the document, his eyes narrowing as comprehension dawned, the initial resistance giving way to acknowledgment of the insight and meticulous care that had gone into her analysis. The executives shifted subtly in their seats, some leaning forward to capture every nuance, others exchanging quiet nods, collectively sensing the pivotal nature of the moment and the undeniable value of the assistant's intervention. Aaliyah's voice remained steady, each sentence articulating the chain of financial and operational implications with clarity that left no room for misunderstanding, while her posture radiated a quiet authority that transcended the formality of her role. David exhaled, a soft sound that punctuated the room's stillness, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he allowed the full weight of her observations to settle in his mind, the tension in the space gradually giving way to reflection and emerging respect. The sunlight glinted off the table's polished surface, illuminating subtle gestures, the faint creak of chair legs, and the delicate shifting of papers as the room absorbed the significance of her words. Aaliyah's presence remained a calm force amid the suspended anticipation, her poised demeanor and deliberate movements reinforcing the power of preparation, intellect, and courage in shaping understanding and influencing decisions. David's expression softened further, a quiet acknowledgment in his eyes as he recognized the integrity and foresight that had guided her presentation, while the staff around them adjusted unconsciously to the new rhythm of the room, attuned to the balance of insight and authority now in motion. The interplay of light, deliberate pacing, and silent recognition created a cinematic tableau, capturing a moment where meticulous preparation, steady composure, and unwavering clarity had begun to shift perceptions, redefine respect, and subtly realign the hierarchy of influence within the room. In the lingering stillness, the weight of understanding, respect, and cautious anticipation hung palpably, a quiet testament to the impact of a single, resolute voice amidst the structure of authority and expectation. The room seemed to exhale as David Hamilton finally lifted his gaze fully to meet Aaliyah Johnson's steady, confident eyes, the subtle shift in his posture signaling an opening he had not expected. Sunlight now slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows in long, warm streaks, casting gentle reflections across the polished table and the neatly organized stacks of contracts, highlighting the calm precision of every detail she had prepared. Aaliyah remained poised, her breathing measured, every movement deliberate, projecting quiet authority that contrasted with the tense energy of the early confrontation. The assistants and executives, previously tense and uncertain, leaned slightly forward, pens poised but still, as if waiting for the next beat of the unfolding realization. She continued to guide them through the contract with a controlled rhythm, each word illuminating a potential pitfall, a legal nuance, or a financial implication that had been previously overlooked, her calm demeanor giving weight to her insight without the need for confrontation. David's fingers traced the highlighted lines once again, a flicker of comprehension passing across his features as the gravity of her observations sank in, the initial resistance in his posture softening into reflection and acknowledgment. The gentle hum of the air conditioning and distant city traffic became a subtle backdrop to the unfolding recognition, emphasizing the quiet authority that knowledge and preparation could command in a room dominated by hierarchy and expectation. Aaliyah's subtle gestures toward sections of the contract, the precise way she outlined each chain reaction, and the clarity in her measured tone drew attention not only to the substance of her work but to the integrity and diligence she had demonstrated, establishing a silent gravity that resonated with everyone present. David's jaw loosened slightly, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the implications and began to appreciate the foresight and courage required to speak up despite the initial dismissal of her input. The sunlight highlighted the edges of documents, glass water bottles, and polished surfaces, reflecting the delicate interplay between tension and understanding, authority and insight, while the room remained suspended in a reflective, almost cinematic stillness. Every person in the room seemed attuned to the significance of the moment, recognizing the balance of competence and composure in a space where previously only position and power had dictated attention. Aaliyah's calm, methodical presence acted as a quiet anchor, her poise and precision radiating a sense of inevitability that even the most skeptical observers could not ignore. David's shoulders relaxed incrementally, and a faint acknowledgment passed in his eyes, a recognition that the clarity and courage of a single individual could guide the outcome of critical decisions, alter perceptions, and quietly shift the dynamics of respect within the room. The space remained filled with a muted energy, the light, subtle sounds, and attentive observation blending seamlessly to mark the moment where preparation, intellect, and integrity converged to command acknowledgment and reconsideration, leaving a lingering impression of the quiet but undeniable power of insight and action. David Hamilton leaned back in his chair, fingers lightly resting on the polished oak table as the golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long, warm streaks across the room. Aaliyah Johnson remained standing a few feet away, her posture straight, shoulders relaxed yet firm, eyes focused and calm, every inch of her presence commanding quiet attention without a word. The staff around them watched intently, pens and papers momentarily forgotten as the weight of the unfolding realization settled over the conference room like a soft, invisible tide. Aaliyah's voice broke the silence with measured clarity, pointing out the subtle interdependencies in the contract, explaining how one overlooked line could ripple through multiple agreements and create unintended financial exposure. Each word was precise, deliberate, carrying authority born not of title but of knowledge, preparation, and unwavering integrity. David's gaze shifted slowly from the highlighted sections to her face, noting the calm confidence and methodical reasoning she displayed, an acknowledgment flickering in his eyes that contrasted with the initial tension and disbelief he had felt. The executives leaned slightly forward, absorbing every detail, the subtle creak of chair legs and faint hum of electronics emphasizing the suspended stillness in the room. Aaliyah gestured gently to each section of the contract she had annotated, her hands moving in fluid, intentional patterns that complemented her verbal explanation, illustrating the sequence of consequences with clarity and precision. David's jaw relaxed imperceptibly, the hard lines of authority softening as comprehension and recognition began to replace initial resistance. The sunlight caught the edges of the glass water bottles, pens, and polished wood surfaces, casting reflective highlights that mirrored the subtle shift in perception occurring within the room. Every staff member seemed attuned to the transformation in dynamic, sensing that the quiet diligence, thorough preparation, and courage to speak had begun to reshape the narrative of authority and respect. Aaliyah's calm breathing and measured movements reinforced the gravity of her reasoning, projecting an unspoken power that drew attention without confrontation, each sentence layered with insight that even the most seasoned executives could not ignore. David exhaled slowly, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that punctuated the space, as he traced her logic through the contract again, fingers gently brushing the highlighted margins, internalizing the implications she had so clearly articulated. The room remained still, yet the subtle energy of awareness, reflection, and acknowledgement rippled quietly through the observers, emphasizing the shift from rigid hierarchy to recognition of intellect and courage. Aaliyah's composed presence, deliberate gestures, and articulate analysis created a cinematic tension that had softened into quiet respect, the sunlight and shadows accentuating the contours of thought, perception, and realization. David's shoulders eased, his eyes maintaining contact with hers, a silent understanding passing between them that the careful preparation, integrity, and calm confidence she had demonstrated were forces of influence capable of shaping decisions, altering perspectives, and quietly commanding the attention of all who had witnessed the unfolding insight. David Hamilton's eyes lingered on the annotated sections, each highlight and margin note illuminating a sequence of consequences he had not fully grasped before. Aaliyah Johnson's voice remained steady, her tone carrying the weight of certainty and preparation as she traced the implications with methodical clarity, showing how a single overlooked clause could ripple through subsidiaries and contracts alike, exposing the company to significant risk. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the glint of the pens and glass water bottles, creating a cinematic interplay of reflections that mirrored the shifting realization in the room. David leaned forward, fingers brushing the edge of the table as his mind mapped the potential fallout she had outlined, the initial resistance in his posture softening into careful consideration. Around them, the staff observed quietly, each person attuned to the subtle changes in dynamic, the hum of air conditioning and distant city sounds forming a muted rhythm as the significance of her insights became undeniable. Aaliyah gestured gently to each section, her movements precise yet fluid, reinforcing the logic she presented verbally, the cadence of her explanation drawing attention to both detail and consequence. David's brow furrowed as comprehension settled in, a faint acknowledgment flickering in his eyes, recognizing the courage and competence it had taken for her to speak up despite the initial dismissal of her input. The room seemed suspended, a balance between authority and insight, the warm afternoon light accentuating the calm focus that Aaliyah projected while also highlighting the subtle shift in David's demeanor from doubt to acknowledgement. Every movement she made, every phrase she uttered, carried clarity that commanded respect without confrontation, illustrating the quiet but profound power of preparation, observation, and courage. The executives and assistants remained poised, their attention captured fully, the subtle shifting of chairs and papers emphasizing the suspended stillness of the moment, a collective recognition of the importance of the insights being shared. David's fingers traced the highlighted clauses again, his shoulders easing slightly as the implications of her analysis fully registered, the realization that the outcome of critical decisions rested in the clarity and diligence she brought to the table becoming apparent. Aaliyah's steady presence anchored the space, her posture and measured speech radiating an unspoken authority that transcended formal hierarchy, demonstrating that intellect and preparation could command attention even in a room dominated by rank. The sunlight shifted across the room, casting long shadows and highlighting the reflective surfaces, creating a cinematic tableau that mirrored the unfolding understanding. As David absorbed the meticulous reasoning she had presented, a quiet acknowledgement settling over him and the room that the careful, informed voice of one individual could influence the trajectory of decisions and reshape perceptions of authority and respect. David Hamilton sat back in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him, his gaze fixed on the sunlight tracing patterns across the polished conference table. The realization of what Aaliyah Johnson had uncovered weighed heavily on him, each detail of the contract now revealing the narrow margin between stability and financial risk. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the quiet hum of the city below and the soft whir of air conditioning, a subtle rhythm that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. Aaliyah remained composed, her hands resting lightly on the edge of her notebook, her posture straight and deliberate, radiating a quiet authority that required no reinforcement from words alone. She spoke again, calmly elaborating on the sequence of potential consequences, her explanations precise and layered with clarity, allowing no room for misinterpretation, every word carrying the weight of careful preparation and insight. David's fingers traced the highlighted sections once more, the initial disbelief giving way to measured acknowledgement as he followed the logical progression she had meticulously mapped. The executives and assistants around the room shifted subtly, leaning forward, their attention captured by the disciplined delivery and the quiet impact of a perspective that had been previously overlooked. The sunlight reflected off pens, glass bottles, and polished surfaces, highlighting the intensity and focus in the room, a visual echo of the recognition settling in the minds of all present. Aaliyah's gestures were fluid, deliberate, and synchronized with her explanation, each motion reinforcing the sequence of potential outcomes and illustrating the depth of her analysis without demanding attention through force. David exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders, a subtle nod of acknowledgment in his eyes, as he processed the significance of her intervention and the foresight it had demonstrated. The room's atmosphere softened, the earlier rigid hierarchy giving way to a subtle realignment where insight and preparation commanded quiet respect. Aaliyah's calm presence, poised articulation, and unwavering focus created a cinematic rhythm that balanced the intensity with reflection, each detail carefully weighed, each implication thoroughly considered. The staff remained silent, absorbed in the gravity of the moment, the delicate interplay of light and shadow accentuating the suspended understanding that authority alone did not define influence. David's expression reflected a mixture of contemplation and respect, the subtle tightening of his jaw replaced by a quiet, internal acknowledgment of the value of her clarity, diligence, and courage. The sunlight slanted further across the room, marking the passage of time, and the ambient sounds of the city below framed the scene, emphasizing the magnitude of recognition, the careful recalibration of judgment, and the silent power of one prepared, observant, and unwavering individual to guide critical decisions and reshape perceptions of competence, integrity, and authority. David Hamilton's eyes softened as he finally leaned forward, placing both hands on the polished surface of the conference table, the sunlight slanting across the room in gentle streaks that highlighted the meticulous notes and annotations Aaliyah Johnson had prepared. She stood a few feet away, composed and resolute, the faintest shift of her shoulders signaling both readiness and patience as she awaited his response. The room remained hushed, the air dense with quiet anticipation, punctuated only by the faint hum of electronics and the distant sounds of the city drifting through the glass walls. David's fingers traced the margins once more, each highlight and annotation resonating in his mind, revealing the accuracy, foresight, and diligence embedded in her work. Aaliyah continued, her voice calm and deliberate, summarizing the chain of consequences, articulating the precise impact of the clauses she had reviewed, and presenting solutions with clarity that left no room for ambiguity. The executives and assistants leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed, absorbing the gravity and precision of her insight, the weight of understanding settling over the room like a slow, deliberate wave. David exhaled slowly, a quiet acknowledgment passing through his expression as he registered the implications and the critical nature of the intervention, the soft light glinting off pens, glass, and polished wood casting a cinematic sheen across the room. Aaliyah's subtle gestures, coordinated with her voice, reinforced her analysis, each movement fluid yet purposeful, emphasizing points without overt assertion, her presence commanding attention through competence and clarity alone. The tension of prior disbelief had dissolved, replaced by a reflective stillness where authority now balanced with informed insight, and David's posture relaxed incrementally as comprehension and respect settled into the space. He glanced around the room, noticing the executives' quiet acknowledgement, the way they absorbed the sequence of reasoning, the subtle understanding that insight, preparation, and integrity could recalibrate perceptions of authority. Aaliyah's calm, deliberate breathing, her poised stance, and measured articulation created a rhythm that filled the room with a quiet sense of inevitability, the impact of her contribution palpable without a single word of protest or demand for recognition. The afternoon light continued to cast long shadows and soft highlights, the interplay of illumination and reflection echoing the transformation of dynamic in the room, as David's internal recalibration mirrored the acknowledgement spreading subtly among the observers. Every detail of her preparation, every carefully considered explanation, and the courage to speak up had created a moment where hierarchy gave way to merit, where knowledge and integrity held their own power, and where the understanding that one prepared and steadfast voice could redirect decisions and reshape perceptions became unmistakably clear to all present. In the stillness, the quiet acknowledgment hung between them, a suspended recognition of competence and courage that would linger, redefining authority through insight and quiet strength. The afternoon sun had shifted lower, casting a soft amber glow across the polished surfaces of the conference room, reflecting off pens, glass water bottles, and the meticulously organized stacks of contracts, creating a warm, cinematic ambience that seemed to mark a quiet turning point. David Hamilton remained seated, his posture more relaxed now, yet attentive, as his gaze lingered on Aaliyah Johnson, whose calm, steady presence anchored the room with a quiet authority that required no words of assertion. The assistants and executives observed in near silence, the subtle shift in the energy of the room evident in the way pens hovered, chairs were slightly leaned forward, and the faint hum of air conditioning seemed to soften in deference to the gravity of the moment. Aaliyah's hands rested lightly on her notebook, gestures minimal yet deliberate, emphasizing her points with fluid precision that guided attention to the critical sections she had highlighted. She spoke once more, her tone measured and clear, summarizing the sequence of potential consequences with a calm finality that allowed the logic of her analysis to resonate fully, illustrating the foresight, preparation, and care she had invested in her work. David's eyes traced the highlighted margins, the understanding deepening with each pass, a subtle acknowledgment passing across his expression as he absorbed the full weight of her insight and recognized the courage it had taken to present it. The sunlight streamed across the room in long, soft streaks, reflecting against the glass and polished wood, accentuating the cinematic quality of the suspended moment as authority and intellect met in quiet balance. Aaliyah remained poised, her breathing steady, her movements minimal but intentional, projecting a sense of calm assurance that seemed to settle the observers and draw attention not to her presence but to the substance and clarity of her contributions. David exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing further, and for the first time in the meeting, a faint smile touched his lips as recognition and respect for her insight became apparent. The room held a soft, reflective silence, punctuated only by the subtle rustle of papers and the distant hum of the city below, the ambience highlighting the shift from tension to acknowledgment. The executives absorbed the scene, some nodding subtly, others exchanging quiet glances that confirmed the shared understanding of the magnitude of her intervention. Aaliyah's calm authority, careful articulation, and precise explanation had reshaped perceptions, demonstrating the quiet yet undeniable power of preparation, clarity, and courage in a professional space dominated by hierarchy. As the sunlight angled lower, casting long shadows and warm highlights across the room, David finally lifted his gaze, making eye contact with her in a moment of unspoken acknowledgment, a silent recognition that integrity, insight, and steadfast composure could influence decisions, command respect, and subtly redefine authority. The atmosphere settled into a gentle stillness, the interplay of light, quiet observation, and reflective comprehension marking the culmination of a moment where one voice had guided understanding, reshaped perception, and left a lasting impression of competence, courage, and calm influence that would linger long after the meeting concluded.